Welcome to this September 8th edition of my Apple Harvest Open Office Hour. As usual, I've got some slides I'll run through and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. And I am just checking to make sure everybody's muted. Great. I don't have a lot to report today. I did test some apples yesterday. Oh, come on. Oops. Just quickly, the weather forecast, no rain this week to speak of. It's going to be measured in the hundredths of an inch, so harvest can progress quite nicely, and then a nice big cool down coming for this weekend. Just in time. A little warmth here might accelerate maturity the next couple of days, and then some cool temperatures should bring the crowds out and make the apples be in good condition. I quickly looked at the next week's long-range forecast, and actually we're now predicted to have an equal chance of normal temperatures, average temperatures next week, which should be highs in the low 70s. Highs in the low 70s and lows in the low to mid 50s, so that would be great. It also notes an above normal chance of precipitation. Well, we'll see how that turns out, because I want to say that's exactly been working out for us. Okay, I tested Macs, I tested Galas, and I tested Honeycrisp yesterday. We've got some Ruby Mac Macintosh, which are being picked here. Actually, they're using them as pick your own. You know, those get a really nice red color. I think the starch index was generally running about 3 to 5. Actually, I got a picture of that coming up. You can't use the DA meter on Macintosh types. It doesn't work at all. So I think these are at the very early stage of when I start to pick them. I usually say Mac harvest can start around 4 on the starch index scale, but we all know that when they're economically ripe, they're economically ripe. So that was the Ruby Macs. I skipped Linda Macs. Linda Macs, actually what I wanted to say, the Ruby Macs seemed a little riper than the Linda Macs. The Linda Macs remind me of the old Red Max Macintosh. I'm not even sure you can get that anymore. They kind of have a red stripe. Now remember, the pictures I take are of the best apples, so that red Linda Mac is a little deceptive. They had a solid starch index of 4. You know, the bricks was only 10.8, which would be nice to get that up a little bit. So I kind of suggested that, you know, those could be held off for a week or so. And then this is the starch pattern on both of those, Linda Mac on the left and Ruby Mac on the right. Now, normally I would ask Duane to say what, you know, that is, but I've got him muted, so I'm not going to. So, you know, these were in the 3.5 to 4 range, 3 to 3.5 to 4. And again, that's kind of what I would expect right at the start of Mac harvest. And then, you know, the seeds were kind of a little bit whitish still, but anyways, they're moving and they're going to continue to move fairly fast now. Gala, Buckeye Gala. I was kind of surprised at how low the DA was on these. They're very red. You can detect the background color change to mostly cream to yellow. So I thought these, the starch index was 4 to 6, the bricks was 13. I said harvest these ASAP, and interestingly, Sean McIntyre here, the manager at the orchard, texted me this morning and said, can he pick them? And I said, definitely. That's a group of 30 trees actually that I kind of pay close attention to, and they were definitely ready to pick. One of the line posts actually in this group was broken and all that wind we had, so he wanted to get those picked ASAP, and I was going to tell him to do that anyways this morning. Very nice. I thinned those, hand thinned those, and they're very nice large fruit, 3-inch diameter Gala. So they're ready to go. Honeycrisp. I have some Royal Red Honeycrisp. It's fairly light crop. When Royal Red gets red, it becomes a very deep, dark red, very attractive. The DA was 0.47, was kind of on the low side. Starch index was 4 to 8. I've got a picture of that coming up. Bricks was 13.3. So they were all within the range of definitely, I think, harvesting Honeycrisp by color. I want to say before I forget that it seems to me the Macintosh apples are not early. but the Gala and the Honeycrisp apples appear to be a little early. And then I've got regular Honeycrisp. That was the Royal Red. I've got regular Honeycrisp. Again, the DA was down around 0.4 to 0.5. Bricks was good. Firmness was good. I don't know. I missed the color on those, but you know, they were ranging from 50 to 75% red. And I guess I only got a picture. I think these were the regular Honeycrisp, which I was rather startled. You know, some people will say the starch index isn't always the best indicator of maturity, but those were ranging from almost 5 up to 8. So to me, Honeycrisp is definitely ready to go. They tasted good, and they could definitely be picked on color. I've heard some people say that maybe color development isn't as good as it could be. I have a tendency to agree there, but I think they're gonna come on fast. And you know, you gotta have some red color to sell the fruit, but even if they're not fully red, if you're getting the background color change and having a starch pattern like this, they're definitely ready to pick. What else did I do? Oh, I don't know. So that's it for the maturity. You know, we bypassed ginger gold are being picked. The silken are all picked. When I open it up, we can see if anybody's looking at anything else in particular, but we're really coming into the big three: Max, Gala, and Honeycrisp. I wanted to mention I am seeing quite a bit of bitter pit. We have a fairly light crop of Honeycrisp. That's not a picture from this year. Just wanted to mention a little bit, you know, most people know it's results from low calcium, high nitrogen. Young trees that are still growing vigorously have a tendency to get bitter pit. Excess potassium or magnesium, you have to watch your nutrient levels really closely when you're dealing with bitter pit. Large apples off young trees, too much vegetative growth. I try and tell people, you know, don't prune your Honeycrisp hard if you can avoid it, because you're going to get vegetative growth, which competes with the calcium in the fruit. There are growing season differences. I hear out of the Hudson Valley, they're thinking it should not be a bad bitter pit year there, but I'm starting to have some indications that it seems like it could be a bad bitter pit year here. And I think that's largely because the crop is light on the Honeycrisp. So you will have less bitter pit with careful nutrient management, careful crop load management, and pruning. You know, we've been through this kind of, you know, what's bitter pit versus stink bug versus cork spot. I'm not going to get into all that because I don't want to take a lot of time. But on the left, you know, I could see some bitter pit. I think this was a royal red Honeycrisp. And on the right, one of the ways to tell if it's bitter pit, this is pretty classic, is bitter pit. The pits in the flesh will have a clear separation from the skin. So if you're waffling about whether it's bitter pit or cork spot will go all the way to the skin, and so won't stink bug injury. So if you're seeing this kind of bitter pit all the way, with a separation from the skin, that's a good indication it's bitter pit. Not going to get into it big time. I just wanted to bring that up because I was looking at these and seeing that. Do I have another slide? Oh yeah. I want to talk about soft scald briefly because that's a problem with Honeycrisp. And again, with light crops, it's more of a problem. Large apples off young trees, the growing season can make a difference. I don't have the best picture there on the right. Don't confuse soft scald or ribbon scald with regular scald. They're completely different. Honeycrisp aren't prone to superficial scald, just soft scald. So I want to remind everybody, because I don't think, you know, I talk to people, hasn't sunk home, and it's kind of a problem. But rapid cooling, putting Honeycrisp right in storage after harvest, especially if your storage is below 38 degrees, you're likely to develop soft scald. There's a whole protocol for holding the fruits called preconditioning at about 50 to 60 degrees for 5 to 7 days. Not too many people do that unless you're really planning on storing Honeycrisp for a long time. Most of you guys are pretty quick in and out with Honeycrisp, but if you're putting Honeycrisp in the cooler, please make sure that cooler is set to 38. Now that can be a problem if you don't have multiple coolers. because Macintosh type apples and many other varieties aren't prone to soft scald. You know, they're best stored at 33 to 34. But if you store Honeycrisp at 34, especially if you put them in storage right away, I almost guarantee you're going to have soft scald problems. And I think a lot of people have seen or are seeing that. So that, I think, is my report. Yep. I'm going to stop my screen share. And if I can figure out how to unmute everybody, I am going to open it up while it's fresh in your mind for comments or questions on any of those topics or anything else you want to talk about. Sorry, I'm not in the orchard today. I was kind of lazy. I didn't get my act together on that. So you should be unmuted.
Hey, John, this is Glenn. Can you put that picture up of the bitter pit not being next to the skin up so I can do a screen grab and put it in my newsletter with your permission?
How about if I just send you that picture, Glenn? Would that be okay?
Either way, okay.
I'll send you that this afternoon.
All right.
I hope I'm right on that. I'm pretty sure I am, but I've read that that's a sign, that's a classic symptom of bitter pit not going all the way to the skin. But I will send that to you, and anybody, I'll open it up to questions or comments.
John, I'll go first.
Great, Glenn. I appreciate that.
Relative to the bitter pit in Honeycrisp, I think some of these older strains, the trees that we've had around for 12, 15, maybe even 20 years, certainly I see a lot of issues with bitter pit that in certain years that I can't really put my finger on why. I understand you have a lot of potential reasons there, but I struggle with that. My question is, these newer strains of Honeycrisp, the Royal Red, the Premiers, the whatever, there are not a lot of those in the ground, and I don't have a lot of experience with them, but they seem to have less bitter pit so far. Is that something that we know about? Has that been confirmed, or am I just, is it just wishful thinking?
I can only comment and say that the Royal Red Honeycrisp I have showing some signs of bitter pit. I want to agree with you, Glenn. I haven't read anything to that effect. I know some of you out there have more, for example, the Royal Red Honeycrisp than I do. I only got 10 trees. Anybody else? I know the bitter pit, if it's really dark red, won't show up as much.
True, but those older strains in a bad year, you can have 60, 70, 80% bitter pit.
Yeah.
Either at harvest or showing up in the bins after we put them away. Preconditioning protocol aside. So I'm not seeing that in the few 3, 4, 5-year-old trees of these younger ones that we have so far. So I'm just curious if anybody else had that experience.
This is Mo. We've got a few thousand Royal Reds, and we don't have 50 or 60% bitter pit, but certainly 10 to 20%, and definitely more than on our older trees, which were more, I guess, the older original Honeycrisp. I suspect that rootstock probably has even more to do with the amount of bitter pit that we're seeing. G41 at this point, I'm sorry that I planted so many G41s with this Royal Red.
I can hear you.
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Bud 9 and even M9 seem to show a lot less bitter pit than 46 does.
You know, and I was reading the newsletter out of the Hudson Valley. They just put out a newsletter, and they're looking at rootstocks. Actually, we're doing we're in the third year at UMass working with Terrence Robinson on one of our NC 140 plantings. We have to start harvesting that next week and doing a bitter pit, but I haven't bitter pit study. I haven't seen any of the results from years 1 and 2 on that yet, but I know Dan Donahue will insist that Bud 9 is arguably gets less bitter pit than most of the other rootstocks. And, I think that's because it's a weak rootstock. You don't have the competition from the foliage for calcium. And I think Geneva 41, it may not be the rootstock itself other than it just is a more vigorous rootstock. And it's going to be the foliage is going to be more competitive for the calcium to the detriment of the fruit. That's my theory.
Hey, John.
More a function of vigor.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of parts to bitter pit, but vigor is a big part. Yeah, Andrew.
Hi, John. Andrew, Honeypot Hill. Hi, Glenn. The only thing I don't want to jinx myself, but the only thing I'll throw in there, what you guys are talking about, is rootstock, and I totally agree. We got these 969s we put in 3 years ago, and virtually no bitter pit. And I did see a talk a few years ago that's saying how 969 is pretty darn good that way, and I see it for sure. Yeah, because the trees are still young too. My other quick question I wanted to ask while I'm on here though is, if you're going to precondition, what's the minimum amount of time to precondition the Honeycrisp if you're going to be putting it in 34 or 35 degree storage?
Don't put it in 34 or 35 degree storage, period.
Well, I have one room. What am I going to do, John?
And the whole preconditioning thing has a dark side in that it's going to could enhance bitter pit development. I don't know, Andrew. I mean, I haven't done a lot of work with preconditioning. I think 4 to 5 days. But you don't want to do 4 to 5 days at like 75 degrees.
No.
It's got to be like 50 to 55. And again, I don't. Anybody else got any comments? I just know that it's recommended with Honeycrisp. That's not for bitter pit either. That's for soft scald.
Right. Well, here's my deal. The last couple of years now, I think Smart Fresh does help mitigate that. I don't think it solves it because 2 years ago we didn't have any soft scald. We don't keep anything past Thanksgiving, but then last year it definitely showed up more substantially than 2 years ago. But all of it Smart Fresh, but that's what my experience has been.
You probably don't have too many people here, like I said, that are preconditioning Honeycrisp. And the soft scald will develop pretty quick, like within a month of storage. I don't know, Glenn, have you got, there's definitely some fairly rigorous protocols on how to do it, but most of them involve keeping a steady temperature at like 50 to 55. And I've seen a time range of 5 to 7 days. I kind of want to, I don't feel much comfortable going beyond 4 to 5 days, frankly. But Andrew, like I said, if you store at 34 or 35 and complain you've got soft scald, to me, you know what I'll do.
John?
Yes, Duane.
I've scored the Honeycrisp that we store out there either 6 or 7 days at room temperature. And so probably the upper 60s or so on. And that seems to work out fairly well.
65 to 70.
Then we put it in a regular 32 storage because we don't have that dedicated storage there. But I've been reasonably happy with the 6 or 7 days.
Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like it's scary to leave them out at room temperature that long, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, just quickly, the earlier harvested Honeycrisp are going to be less prone to soft scald than late harvested Honeycrisp. So you want to focus on your early harvest for storage.
Even though they'll be sitting in storage for 3 or 4 more weeks, you think they're less prone. That's interesting. Okay.
Well, it is. The later the harvest, the more prone they are to soft scald development.
John, I'd just comment that there are some workarounds on the preconditioning if you want to get creative enough. There are not having extra room at a certain temperature. There are people who will pick them, put them in the cooler overnight to take out the field heat, and then move them into a refrigerated trailer or a box truck for the 6 or 7 days if you have that equipment to spare or you want to rent it. That seems to satisfy, it doesn't get them too cold, but I think addresses your concern that a longer time at a warmer temperature is going to ultimately affect condition. So there are ways around it if you want to work that hard.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because I don't think, I know a few of you have issues with soft scald, and I hate to see it because you put the Honeycrisp in the room and you go back 3 or 4 weeks later and you got a bunch of soft scalded, and it's pretty nasty looking. So I don't have Duane's suggestion if that's worked for him. Again, I've seen different scenarios, but two things. I think, the same conditions that exacerbate bitter pit also do soft scald. So light crops, too much nitrogen, apples off young trees, and then in terms of bitter pit, the colder you can store them, the better too. So who told me that they don't like to grow Honeycrisp?
John?
Everyone.
Yes, Duane.
The Honeycrisp that I harvested last year, I stored until late June and early July. I know that's not commercially feasible, but anyway, I got very little soft scald because of that protocol that I say. Now, obviously, every year it's going to be a little bit different, but it didn't really influence the storage potential that much.
That's good. Great.
I got a question.
Yes, Mo.
We've played with NAA plus retain because of the two different modes of action that they offer in terms of keeping the apples on the trees. But I haven't heard any discussion on whether or not NAA plus Harvista will work similarly. Does anybody have an answer to that?
I don't. Sorry. I don't. My only thought would be that if you're using Harvista, you really shouldn't need NAA.
Well, if you're using retain, you really shouldn't need NAA either, right? But I mean, Harvista, what is it? Retain slows down ethylene development, but Harvista blocks ethylene or something like that, or is it vice versa? But the NAA stops the abscission layer from forming, and I don't see where, I don't know that Harvista stops the abscission layer from forming. Or does it?
No, I don't think so. I assume, and Duane could probably, I mean, the abscission layer and ethylene are probably related. So I assume that ethylene production is a trigger to form the abscission layer. But I've never seen any recommendations, but I don't dwell in the Harvista world. I've never seen how people address that in NAA, but I'm just guessing, Mo, that again, and I don't know. I really don't know.
John, I think you're correct in the fact that putting on Harvista and NAA pretty much at the same time would not make sense because Harvista starts to kick in relatively fast. I say within 3 days. And so that's pretty close to what NAA does. So it would not be necessary, I don't think.
Yeah, Andrew here. I was going to, you took the words out of my mouth, basically, Duane. I thought the difference was that it takes 7 days, but well, 5 to 6.
We're losing you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna.
Kelsey needs a new iPad.
I'm gonna make it a new my remaining years to get everybody up to speed on this technology. It's okay. Jim Wargo he watched. Jim is the Valent sales rep. He watched our show last week, and the subject came up of NAA and retain, and he kind of suggested that he'd rather use retain over NAA even late. I guess the value of NAA and retain is if you're getting kind of late on that retain application, in other words, the fruit's already starting to loosen and fall off, the retain will help with the fruit that's still okay. But if you put some NAA in, that'll help the apples that are almost ready to fall off. That'll keep them from falling off. So I get the impression that retain and NAA, its best use and value together is if you're getting late on that retain application. Anyways, we've been going back and forth by emails a little bit on that. And it's a little bit of a judgment call on that still. But I think, Mo, to answer your question, I don't think there's any Harvesta and NAA application.
Okay.
Well, everybody agree with my assessment of maturity?
Yep.
More or less, okay. Is the next week coming up going to be a busy week?
Hope so.
Hey, John.
Yeah, Andrew.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I came in a few minutes late. I missed your initial assessment of maturity. What were you saying about just basically Macintosh poly, right? Honeycrisp? Could you just recap real quick?
Yeah, I mean, Macs, I tested Linda Mac and I tested Ruby Mac because they had the best color, and the starch index on those was about 4. The bricks wasn't quite there yet. It was below 12. I just think we're right at the start of Mac harvest. I mean, I know they've been economically ripe for a few days. So the next 2 weeks, I think we'll progress from 4 to 6 on the Mac harvest, and that'll be the majority of it. I thought Macs were not particularly early, but Honeycrisp was, in terms of starch index and the DA meter, was right up there. And the color was a little bit lacking, but I think the maturity of the apples was surprisingly mature. And I'd be picking Honeycrisp fast right now if it was me, based on color. And the Gala also, at Buckeye Gala, we're very ready to pick. They're being picked this morning here. That's it. That's it, Andrew.
I agree with that assessment. Thank you.
And you know, the Honeycrisp, we've got a lightish crop, so that's going to advance maturity on those some compared to normal. I think we'll get some good coloring weather over the next week. And I had to guess, I mean, a Honeycrisp without retain certainly will be picked over the next week. If you got retain on them, then it's your problem. It's not a problem, but. How about drop? I mean, I just not seeing much. Things look good. No?
only push off. Only where the apples are too big.
Yep. You know, otherwise, I'm not seeing any what I would call pre-harvest drop to speak of it.
No.
I'm waiting for it to start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Where I put some retain on at a lower rate late, there's a little bit of drop on Max. Hey, just one quick question. Have you seen a difference? Anybody ever studied Honeycrisp with retain versus without retain for the bitter pit or for soft scald? Has that ever been looked at? No. Okay.
Well, not that I know of.
John, I put on a couple of years ago. I put on 2 rates of 2 pouches of retain on Honeycrisp in the end of August, first part of September. Harvested them about the 8th of October. Now, and then I put some of those in storage, and there was no difference between the soft scald or bitter pit in either one after I took it out of storage. I didn't assess things at harvest because, of course, you wouldn't soft scald. But I don't know. It wasn't a problem then, but I did make the assessment.
So whether that you're saying whether you use the retain or not, it didn't make any difference. There wasn't any more or less bitter pit or soft scald, if there was much at all.
Well, after if I kept them until after Christmas, yes, there was. But
There was
and,
what?
and those Honeycrisp were not preconditioned, and so obviously they were set up in two ways. One, they were late harvested, and two, they were also not given a preconditioning. So
Yeah, I mean, I would surmise that if retain delays maturity enough, that might also delay bitter pit development, because I think bitter pit comes on with maturity. I remember that trial you did, Duane, and those apples looked really good still in early October. I don't recall. Now that might have been a function more of crop load or growing season, but I don't recall seeing much bitter pit on those at that time. I'm starting to see quite a bit of bitter pit, and it's concerning. I think it's here, at least, it's mostly the lightish crop load.
I would agree with you.
So Duane, where you did use the retain, you had less bitter pit after storage?
I didn't have any more than I would on the untreated control. So it did not. I didn't think it helped it, but it didn't hurt it. It was a wash. I'd have to check the date again, but it didn't seem to be much difference. But again, that's not something you would normally do with Honeycrisp, because we're talking about early harvest now, or during the normal harvest season.
Don?
Yes, Glenn.
I'll just add to that with a little bit of experience from the field. It's not a research trial, but I was working with a grower a few years back that was having a significant problem with late picked Honeycrisp, bitter pit, and scald, which I think we all agree is a function of maturity. So the idea was to get with the retain program on these apples and maybe increase that third rate to a half rate, I believe is where we were at for a year or two. And surprisingly, or at least surprisingly to me, the retain had no beneficial effect on certainly scald. It may have helped a little bit with the bitter pit. I don't understand those results, but that grower was not satisfied with how that part was trending, and he's not using retain on his Honeycrisp at all anymore and picking them 5 or 6 times and selling the latest ones first, obviously. So I don't think it's a one-to-one correlation. There's something else going on there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's if it was relatively easily solvable, somebody would have done it by now.
Right.
I don't think it is, and I think the folks out at Cornell are working on it, but I haven't seen anything definite come out of. Keep in mind, some of those just good basic practices about nutrient management, and there's been a lot written up on both bitter pit and soft scald management. You can research that. Actually implementing it is not the easiest thing in the world. I'm still live on Facebook. I hope nobody minds. I don't think anybody's saying anything that they wouldn't say otherwise. But please feel free to chime in. If not, I won't, everybody's busy. I won't drag this out too much.
I just got one observation from a grower. We don't have that many peaches in Maine, and Heimer had none this year. But a grower in central Maine reported that his peaches, compared to like 15, 20 years of experience, were out of whack, that things were a week to 10 days early, and then some that were normally in a sequence, the sequence got reversed. And so his peach maturity is kind of weird this year.
I didn't see that here, Glenn, frankly. I thought our peach season was right about as could be predicted. That's my impression. I don't know if anybody else, I don't think anybody else has told me that down here, at least, that peaches seem to be terribly early. And I know I got a couple significant peach growers on this call. Don't know what to say. How about don't grow peaches in Maine?
Big money if you can grow them.
I won't go down that. I've got an opinion about that, but I won't go there. All right. Any other apples that you're actively engaged in right now besides the Max, Gala, and Honeycrisp? Ginger Golds, are they done? I know some people put retain on Ginger Golds. Pick your own.
Have you looked at Blondie?
No, I haven't. And I'm trying to think. I have not. But you know, that should ripen about the same time as Gala. So I assume it's coming along fast.
I agree.
I think we have a few trees, not as many as I used to. Should probably go look at those. I forget about them.
Crimson Crisp, have you looked at them?
They're not ready.
Not ready.
I don't think Crimson Crisp should be ready until the end of September.
Yeah, we always pick them before that.
I picked all of that MAIA SM, what I want to call Sweet Maya this morning. That's definitely needed picking. That should be a nice apple for you. I've been saying that for a few weeks now. I have the 3 new Cornell releases here. So I'll be following those. They're kind of interesting looking.
Tier 2 selections, though.
What's that? Is that Andre?
Yes, they're tier 2 selections. So
Yeah.
unfortunately.
The Firecracker looks really nice. Looks good, but it's not ready to pick yet.
We have pink. We have some pink luster too. Well, the trees pretty much got stripped this weekend.
Yeah,
So people sample them and they pick them. So
they didn't eat them though.
didn't
No eating.
I think it's interesting with some of the MAIA releases and these Cornell releases. We've all been kind of like wondering when we're going to get a chance for some new varieties. Well, here we are. I'm not saying they're the greatest in the world, but they're probably okay. And for pick your own, they might start to develop a following.
This
Yeah.
Labor Day weekend has always been a bit short on good selection of apples.
I'm curious, Frank Carlson, did you ever get on? I guess not. Well, I'd like to hear from Frank. I'll work with him on his issues. I'll plan on doing this one more week next week, but I think by then the ball will really be rolling. I get enthusiastic about new stuff, and then this morning I said, "Oh gosh, I got to do this." No,
yeah, that's what I said too.
I know, Mo. And it's gonna, not much is gonna change, but I'll do it for another week or two if you guys will all get on. I appreciate it. You do. I think it's kind of interesting. I think we get a few tidbits out of it. Glenn and Duane, I particularly appreciate your contributions because you guys have been around a long time.
Hey, watch that.
Well, Glenn, you in particular at least you used to, you get around, and Dwayne's got you beat on the age thing, but it's good information. And
Thanks a lot, John.
Yeah. Hey,
right.
Facts are facts, right?
All right, next week.
Yeah, we'll go next week, and everybody have a good week.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
John.
everybody. Have a good week.
Bye. Yep.